Thank you very much. We have a respected hand raised for a question here. Cymatic Jane, would you like to ask a question of Dan?
Hi, no, I just wanted to say welcome, Dan. Very excited to have your double Scorpio energy in the room today. Where you go, there is spiciness and sass in the world of physics. So I think we are all very excited, and I just wanted to say that before the class started. Thank
Yeah,
you.
sometimes I'm not that very diplomatic, but double Scorpios do that. Thank you, dear. Nice to meet you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So are we actually initiating a recording here now? Are we ready to play?
Yeah,
we're going.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
perfect.
good.
What a perfect intro, because Cymatic Jewel actually helped piece together a bit of an intro here from some fun prompts with Grok on Dan Winter, as well as stuff that Cymatic Jewel presented. And here is the official intro for Dan Winter. All right.
It's official.
It's official. All right, interdimensional space cadets, strap yourselves into your fractal spacesuits, because we're about to blast off into the mind-bending cosmos with Dan Winter and his presentation, How the Universe Works According to Dan Winter. Dan Winter's adventure riding the longitudinal wave of fractality perfected spans 5 implosive decades, during which he has worked with brilliant minds such as Buckminster Fuller, Itzhak Bentov, Tom Bearden, Robert O. Becker, Korotkov, and Drunvalo Melchizedek. Today, Dan's unpacking slides from PhiRay.com that'll blow your mind harder than a phase conjugate supernova. We're talking charge collapse, the secret sauce where energy doesn't just fizzle out, but gains juice as it squeezes into a fractal hug, powering life, gravity, and maybe even your morning coffee if you squint hard enough. Expect wild visuals of golden ratio cascades, DNA doing the twist, and why the universe is basically a self-organizing love machine. From his goldenmean.info empire to his YouTube galaxy, Dan's been dropping truth bombs like how the Therify plasma gadget and imploder tech are the real-world Jedi tricks born from his theories. To quote Dan, if you take Planck length and time, the musical key signatures of the universe, and use simple powers of golden ratio fractality conjugation perfected, you get all the biologic negentropic variables, which is around 200 physical constants. Quantum biology is not subjective, it's fractally perfected. So grab your pineal pine cones kissing popcorn and get ready for a roller coaster through the physics of soul, the fractal field, and why Dan thinks the universe works like a cosmic DJ spinning phi ratio beats. Let's give a negentropic implosive cheer for the man whose collaboration with the brightest minds to show us how the stars and our hearts keep the party going. Dan Winter.
Oh, that was cute. Thanks. So then, shall I proceed then? So,
Please.
well, how we're going to start today, it's like a 5 or 10 minute warm up, a little bit of an outline and teaser. And then the main focus of today does use some visuals. And the idea was it'll be a lot more fun for you if you have the visuals up while we do this conversation. We put the visual slideshow at phiray.com, PHIRAY.com/gain energy collapse. And the link is there at the web. So if you follow along on the slideshow, you'll have more fun. And note that the thumbnails are on the left. You just scroll left, and the thumbnails are clickable, and they're numbered, and we will be in sequence. And so you can follow along. And
that's above in the nest, so to speak. If you look above us, everybody can click on that and follow along at home. Thanks, Dan.
Great. Yeah, so we got pictures. And we're going to try to alternate with questions. That's one of the main reasons I came to here, because I know your questions are going to be fun, so it ain't too much monologue. And so the background physics for everything we talk about today, with most of the links, is all at plankfire.com, PLANCKPHIRE, the fire, the flame of Planck, plankfire.com. The book was #1 on Amazon Wave Mechanics for months. And so that's the background here, that geometry, precisely Planck times integer exponents golden ratio, that fractality, that conjugation, that is the perfection of charge collapse. And that's the subject of today. All negentropic centripetal self-organizing forces are generated that way, especially including the cause of gravity, the cause of consciousness, the cause of life force, the cause of all action at a distance, and many other things. The cause of lucid dreaming. So the little warm up here, and then maybe a few fun questions, then we'll go to that slideshow. So the idea of today was supposed to be, quote, the subtitle, The Secrets of the Universe, according to Dan Winter. The gravity which holds mass together is specifically implosive conjugate compression into the holographic fractality of the longitudinal array. Remember, longitudinal waves are the stuff gravity's made of, if you believe Bearden's equations. So what we want to do in terms of understanding the secrets of the universe is try to grok deeply the meaning of how the nodes, the places where the compression waves converge to make what's called mass, which are nodes in a hologram, obviously, and how some nodes in that hologram, atoms of mass, do better at making phone calls than other nodes in that hologram. Sometimes the sacred space would be an example. And we're going to use the plasma sphere of Project Looking Glass, which was a device to see into the past and future, to try to understand the physics. And we got some pictures of that, actually, as an example to begin to understand how this communication occurred. Other examples of how the communication happens. For example, the communication and telepathy will happen at sacred space nodes on the Dodecacosa grid. Telepathy is commercially available there, and it's not available in metal buildings in ugly cities with electrosmog. And the reason for that is what we need to understand, that some nodes in the hologram are good for phone calls. They're called embedded in the longitudinal array. So we want to understand that. We're going to use the physics of scrying, the physics of the Olmec obsidian mirror, a phase conjugate mirror for ancestor phone calls, the chronovisor, the Vatican's example of Project Looking Glass for seeing past and future. As examples, we're going to apply that to pyramid wireless power. In short summary, pyramidwirelesspower.com, that the pyramid works and distributes wireless power specifically only because the Schumann harmonic cascade is a caduceus, called a phase conjugate pump wave. That's why the pyramid was called the Hummer. And by being piezoelectrically tuned on the nodes of the grid, the compression at the pyramid piezo implodes capacitance. And that implosion of charge, due to the Schumann cascade being so well tuned, golden ratio times Planck, the pyramid then can dump out a coherent longitudinal magnetic field directionally into the array called global wireless power, only available at the nodes of the cross point of that array and not elsewhere. And that's a little bit where we're going to go very gently. We have a slide called Einstein's mistakes, and we have another slide called Tesla's mistakes. And we don't intend to pick on either wonderful, powerful, useful, amazing genius gentlemen, but being wonderful, powerful, amazing geniuses, they also made horrible mistakes as well. And unfortunately, when you see Tesla out on his lawn trying to light the light bulbs from the high voltage tower, and those light bulbs are not at the longitudinal nodes of the grid, it's proof that Tesla did not know how to locate the longitudinal nodes, the only place you can pick up global wireless power, pyramid power, and all the good stuff. And then when you see Tesla choosing 60 cycle, opposite to phase conjugate, the voltage at which the heart stops at the lowest voltage is horrible. It's anti-biologic for power distribution in most of America. Instead of a phase conjugate frequency cascade, the only way to produce coherent longitudinal interferometry, global wireless power, you can see Tesla really made some horrible mistakes because he didn't understand phase conjugation and actually longitudinal interferometry. Even though that was his big dream, was the death ray, he began to understand how to phase conjugate and make a longitudinal, but he didn't understand how to do that efficiently because he didn't read planckfire.com. What a shame. No. And then, so we're going to extend that conversation in the pictorial a little bit to looking at that same frequency cascade in the most important brainwave measurement of history. When we measured John Charles brainwaves, alpha to gamma cascade, powerful golden ratio cascade, alpha to gamma, just as he replicably bilocates, teleports with witnesses, comes back between stand between his toes multiple times. We know the physics of what enables him to teleport, and we have the graphic of his brainwaves. The coherent was off the charts. We know exactly why he was able to teleport. We're going to show the brainwaves. You've probably seen that before. But that's so instructive to the physics of how all stargates and portals work. He just before he teleports, he got this incredibly implosive brainwave cascade from alpha to gamma, all golden ratio. Off the charts coherent. You got to turn down the gain in the brainwave preamplifier. And then he sees where he's been in one eye and where he's going through the other eye Can you guess what's happening in his pineal gland? Hello, that could be a node in the array. What do you think that means? And the other thing we're going to mention, just as we introduce the slideshow, is my half a lifetime of work with Professor Phil Callahan, Tuning into Nature, and where he spent, he's the one who set up the physics of what became peaceuniversity.net. You could predict where war would break out electrically by measuring where permissivity and permittivity breaks down in the magnetism of the soil, the dielectric. And what means basically is if the charge does not go from village A to village B, they're going to make war. He found that out in the Amazon when you could predict when the next tribe was going to be headhunters. Because if the soil is paramagnetically conductive, the next tribe is going to be friendly. If the soil is not magnetically conductive, paramagnetically conductive, the next tribe down the river is going to shoot you. And then he proved it, Ireland, Yugoslavia, Israel. You could predict in advance where war versus peace is going to break out based on charge distribution efficiency, which is the physics of the word hey ave, heaven. And so restoring the magnetic flux permissivity of the grid is the physics of all peacemaking, because peacemaking is defined by the origin of negentropy. Hello. Anyway, so then the other little clue to what we want to play with in the slideshow, which is next, is going to be when we look at the clairvoyance. I worked with many of them, psi perception of quarks, occult chemistry, who saw the heart of the sun, the heart of the human, and the heart of the anu, 3 anu per quark in every atom. The shape of that slip knot, 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside, which was then justified with quantum physics in the book Psi Perceptions of Quark. Psi Perception of Quarks by Phillips. I knew him a bit. Anyway, so that's a slip knot, 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside, which obviously we now know is 7 spins tetracubic, 5 spins dodecacosa. It was a platonic nest of charge collapse. The reason heart muscle exists, the same 7 spin. The reason hydrogen exists, anu. The reason the heart of the sun exists, they saw the same anu. Hello. This was platonic charge collapse in essence. And that's what anu, sun god, means. So anyway, we got pictures about that, and that's where we want to go with the slideshow. So now I was about to start the slideshow, but if there's any fun questions now.
I would like to maybe, go ahead, Jane.
I have a fun question, but again, it can also be moved to the end if it's too much for now. But I was just thinking with that fantastic merger of esoteric and spiritual and modern physics, is it possible, do you think, to move back towards that type of technology? As we move forward, in our modern technology, is it possible to move forwards into a back form of, centripetal, negentropic technology? And what would the future look like with that kind of reality? Would we be, constructing pyramids and things like that?
Well, the metaphor for how pyramids made global wireless power is a dramatic introduction to the fact that if our power distribution grid were phase conjugate and negentropic, the transformers would start to become self-aware, and then we'd really have to deal with how to have a soul in the face of AI once we define what a soul is, which is that implosion. It's a fascinating idea. And if we got back to when the clairvoyants who studied subatomics so well, they predicted subatomic physics decades before Leadbeater and Besant, and we knew those people through Murray Zupa and the president of Theosophic in Chicago. Their ability to see the subatomic particles, the anu, for example, inside living material, those little anu were impish and joyful and playful and fun, obviously. Inside, however, things like aluminum, which is death to life force and basically death to people, those subatomic particles were in jail. So if we actually understood microclairvoyance, and that's one of the places we want to go today, as in the slideshow, there's some implication for the physics of clairvoyance. And let me give you one little taste or intro to that thought here. At the main website today, phiray.com, when people are having this bliss experience of the world's most powerful Schumann magnetic from the coil in Phiray, which is an incredible water treatment device itself, because it's the most powerful magnetic field exactly tuned to the whole Schumann cascade in history, that multiple, when they get settled and focused and still and put their attention in the center of that implosive toroidal nest magnetic field, many have experienced clairvoyance, literally seeing through the body transparently, because the physics of clairvoyance is only and specifically the ability to embed and center in the coherent longitudinal EMF array. That's what clairvoyance is. That's, for example, why when kids learn to make golden ratio alpha gamma in their brain waves and start seeing without their eyes, many of them start talking to their dead grandmothers and their parents freak out. It's a good introduction, actually. So the ability to implode and center in the longitudinal array is the beginning of the physics of clairvoyance. And to get the focus down to that level of scale where you can see subatomic structures, which is proven. What Ledbetter and Sid, that book was accepted in modern chemistry. They predicted subatomic structures decades before. Hello, how did they get there? They got their attention focused. Okay. But I think maybe I'll begin with the slideshow now. Is that okay? Or, yes?
Oh, please, yes. Which number are we starting with?
Number 1. So this is the slideshow, gain energy during collapse, or is specifically gain energy collapse is the phiray.com/gain energy collapse. Slide number 1. Secrets of the universe, according to Dan Winter. The gravity which holds mass together is specifically implosive, conjugate compression into the holographic fractality of the longitudinal array. If you think about that and you wanted to know why commercial quality telepathy, Korotkov proved, was only available at the magnetic line cross nodes of the Earth, which is where the longitudinal nodes compress and embed. Another exquisite example is the fractality of hydrogen, is perfect example, which is what my equation proved. Each node in that array, mass is a node in that array, is a holographic image of the universe, depending on how well it is embedded in that array. So nodes of that array, like the plasma inside Project Looking Glass time mirror, they're so embedded in the array that you can look through and see the past and the future. However, if you've got nodes of that array in your metal aluminum building with electrosmog and bad air, hell, the nodes in that array are literally sending you to hell. Sorry, they're not embedded. So once we understand the physics of sacred space, so sacred compression space in a stone circle in the woods, or an ancient Schumann-filled temple, or Stargazer time mirror, or the Looking Glass are great examples versus your average Anu atom positioned in a poisonous electrosmog. So getting the idea of what sacred space is electrically is an intro to the physics of embedding in the array and how DNA radio works. And if you compress and embed in that array, it's called not just lucid dreaming, but the only way through death, physicsofsoul.com. So this is just some pictures. Slide number 2 of the original Anu. You see the 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside, occult chemistry, 3 Anu per quark. This was literally subatomic physics. And the Anu that were located in sacred space, they were happy. But the Anu inside steel and aluminum, they were in hell. Notice that, and now we're slide number 3. Notice the 7 layers of heart muscle. This is the Pettigrew dissections in Fields of Form, Vortex of Life, Lawrence Edwards, biodynamic and anthroposophic literature. 7 layers of the heart muscle, you couldn't get a better squeeze, are actually about implosion. And this is that they're actually sending slipknot donut spirals on the torus into phase, circulating in the bloodstream, the shadows of which are called The Alphabet of the Heart, the title of my first book, and The Origin of the Hebrew Alphabet. So that's 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. And notice, I think, you know what? The cool thing about this is that animation, we're in slide number 4, but notice that animation where the donut self-organizes into 7 smaller donuts, the smoke rings. This is called the 7 stages of invagination in Steiner's work, codified by the 7 arrows, the 7 spins of the tetra. And so this ability to embed, we're in slide number 5 now. Life is a skill to enter charge compression. Example, how to dream or die successfully, because that creates embedding in the array charge distribution, sometimes called heaven, hey ave, and is the definition of consciousness awareness. So unpacking your awareness into a larger array is the only definition of expansion of consciousness. For example, after you have bliss experience and your aura can experience compression, that's the intro to the physics of lucid dreaming. We have the frequencies that enable lucid dreaming, which is pretty much the only real predictor of who's got a soul and gets through death. Slide number 6. So this was from Project Looking Glass. I thought this was fun. So if you look, what's happening here is you've got a purple arc, very much like the Ark of the Covenant, or actually very much like Tesla's whole career began when he learned how to use a carbon arc. Remember, carbon is a phase conjugator. And the Ark of the Covenant was called the mercy seat because who would sit there? A plasma domain, also named Dominus Vobiscum. I mean, God. So an implosive phase conjugate arc enables the plasma to embed in a much larger array. For example, our plasma technology, plasmafire.com, therify.net, and now phiray.com. These create a plasma sphere, which can be used for many, many things, not just healing. If you had a little clairvoyance, a little training in scrying, for example. So this was called Project Looking Glass. Also, it's related to the papal Project Chronovisor, which we have a picture. So making the plasma recursively implosive negentropic enabled to embed in the larger coherent longitudinal array, the only physics of the Aboriginal ancestral memory, songline, dreaming track. Much like the phase conjugate principle, the coating under Nostradamus' scrying water cup, or the Olmec ancestor phone calls obsidian mirror, similar to John Dee's showstone for calling angels. So these were all phase conjugate mirrors to enable embedding into the longitudinal array. And this is slide number 7. You see this famous priest in the Vatican using the chronovisor. He's looking back at the Romans. Why? They needed to prove the story of Jesus. So the chronovisor was another example of these devices. So using the array and the physics of scrying is this embedding into the longitudinal. And this is an example of the carbon arc. Now, do you see the Buckminster fullerene there at the center and the embedding into the perfect implosive? We're in slide number 8. So fullerenes are an example, and I knew Bucky very well, and of course he didn't have a clue. But fullerenes are negentropic because they're conjugators. You get the magic space at the center of the fullerene because carbon, when you pop the quiff, I mean when you take an arc and carbon goes from tetracubic to dodecaecosa, the fullerene, which is our Star Mother kit here, and I have the model, but you don't have but the Star Mother kit is an example of a fullerene. So we want to talk about what happens where the conjugation happens at the middle, which is the magic 0-point negentropic place in the middle of the conjugate array. So next slide, number 9, is just a summary. Gaining energy during charge collapse, Planetary.com, is the electric reason gravity exists and the reason objects fall to the ground. Implosive charge collapse, Planetary. It is to the electric reason perception and bliss form in the brain synaptic array. Let's say we're going to say it, say we said it. No, say it and then say we said it. The only physics of consciousness, Gary Schwartz and Stuart Hameroff, eat your heart out. The only physics of consciousness that's real is the fact that in that synaptic array, the net of fireflies of your synapses, a liquid crystal vortex forms and implodes by golden ratio implosion, which is how we measure the brain waves. And this, for the first time, explains where your consciousness goes when you dream and when you die. Gary Schwartz and Stuart Hameroff, eat your heart out. Your little microtubule model of consciousness ain't going to say much about where was the physics of consciousness while you were proven to be outside your body. You were a plasma vortex, obviously. And what made that plasma vortex stable enough to lucid dream and take memory through death? That's the subject of physicsofsoul.com. It's literally implosive compression into coherence propagated into the array. That is the physics of whether you have a soul.com. This is the electric reason seeds germinate. The electric reason life force is powered, the same charge collapse. flameinmind.com/life force. It is the electric reason soul and bliss exists, physicsofsoul.com. This is the electric reason pyramids and obelisks make global wireless power, as discussed, pyramidwirelesspower.com. This is the only electric reason. Hello, our friends there. This is the only electric reason 0-point and vacuum energy exists, is to gain energy during charge collapse. The title of this slideshow, a discussion, fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. This is the electric reason golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics. A smoking gun. fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity. This is the electric reason electron shells and nuclear hadrons are platonic nests, and therefore the reason electric shells and nuclear hadrons exist is because you nest platonic solids, which is how you make golden ratio and make the nuclear and electron atomic table. It is simply a simple platonic nest creating golden ratio. goldenmean.info/creation. We have slides. This is the electric reason for all action at a distance. Calling it entanglement was childishness. Actually, phase conjugate compression is the physics of the embedding that hooks up the longitudinal array, and conventional physics calling that entanglement hooking up Einstein-Rosen bridges is undescriptive, unhelpful, and childish. No, let's describe action at a distance accurately. It is coherent longitudinal interferometry. And when the longitudinal wave compresses at the node, it won't exchange inertia with the transverse only until it bounces to the next node in the array as a dodecahedral Earth grid. And that's how we introduce the only physics of all action at a distance. Slide number 10. So just here's the picture. When we measured Jean-Charles Moyen just before he teleported replicably with witnesses, came back from sand between his toes, we had to turn the gain in the EEG preamp way down. flameinmind.com/lucidbrain. You can see all this. And here's the alpha in green, all of the gamma in purple. And this is very, very high amplitude brainwave cascade. And then he teleports, then he sees through one eye where he was and the other eye where he's going. This is an introduction to the physics of inhabiting the array. This is the definition of shamanism. Shem on, the access to the black hole. Slide number 11. So we had 45,000 views on the film by this title, How a Charged Vortex Makes Gravity, on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/danwinterfractalfield. This is the only real physics of electrogravitics. There's two simple physics principles to understand how a charged vortex makes gravity. I'm going to skip now to slide 13. So looking to the left, the transverse up and down wave is approaching the vortex in the center, slide 13. Then that travels down the caduceus side view of 10 spirals of golden mean on the cone, which we've proved is the perfection of all vortex, all platonic nests, and specifically equations prove this is how hydrogen is built. So when the transverse wave goes down the caduceus, you get what's called optimized translation of vorticity, and the squirt gun spits out at the tip, specifically the Planck dimension. Moving to the right, the coherent longitudinal directional EMF, otherwise known as a gravity wave. So because the squirt gun has to be tuned to golden ratio in Planck, or you don't get the longitudinal, but when the squirt gun of the vortex is properly tuned to golden ratio in Planck, planckfire.com, then you make gravity. So this is an example of a vortex making gravity. Slide number 14, you see here, there's actually animations here, and they're built in here. Look at, I'm playing an animation of a longitudinal wave in slide 14, which you can write in the keynote export. Slide number 15. So that's the caduceus of golden ratio, and that's what we proved is absolutely the way hydrogen, DNA, Earth grid, zodiac, and the universe is built. Exactly. So, and now I'm going to just skip back to slide number 11. We want to see something else in that vortex. Okay, so we go down the vortex and we create a longitudinal because of the squirt gun tuned to Planck. But the other part of this, there's a slide I'm missing here. Yeah, the other part of this is that the adding and multiplying. So if I take this, let me just pick the right slide here. Okay. I'm on slide number 17 now. So if you look to the right on slide 17, you see the equation for the radii of hydrogen drawn out. And you see 10 spirals of the golden mean, which is not only how hydrogen built, but you can prove that's how DNA is built as well. Very accurate radii of hydrogen predicted there, Planck times golden ratio. So those 10 spirals of the golden mean, what they do is they allow the recursive adding and multiplying of not just the wavelength and frequency, but also the phase velocity. Remember, we're on the question now, how does a charged vortex make gravity? We want to know how gravity is made, unlike every physicist on this planet. And what we do is in the top-down view on the right, 10 spirals of the golden mean, the waves add and multiply recursively constructively, not just their wavelength and frequency, but also their phase velocity. And when only golden ratio allows recursive adding and multiplying of phase velocity, obviously, that's called fractality perfected by golden ratio. And the phase velocities adding and multiplying correctly, constructively, answers the problem Einstein died with, which was, what is the solution to infinite non-destructive compression? Actually, the solution was in the word infinite. Anyway, but the waves add and multiply recursively, constructively, their phase velocities. So at the center, only golden ratio form of compression has converted the compression of charge, golden spirals, down into the acceleration of charge, adding and multiplying of phase velocities, constructive only by fractal golden ratio. An acceleration of charge is named the gravity. So once you understand more accurately, gravity is only a name for acceleration of charge experienced by fractal compression. Most physicists already agree that fractality causes gravity. What they don't know is what an electric fractal looks like. Here's the picture. And simple examples. This is, I'm at slide 18. This is the side view of the famous EM electromotive drive, making gravity. What you got is microwave in a caduceus. Now, if they retuned that microwave in that caduceus to flockfire.com, the dummies, they would increase the amount of gravity they made because the implosive heterodyning of the phase velocities would project more efficiently the longitudinal directionally the physics of gravity. So now that we've predicted how to optimize the EM drive accurately, my physics of gravity, in a sense, could be proven. And there are many more slides of this, and we're going to move on here. Actually, now we're moving to slide number 20, but let's just take a little pause. And I've been doing monologue here. How are we doing for fun questions? Shall we? Let me have a little drink here.
Oh, that's fantastic, Dan. Thank you very, very much. And I know, I think there's probably people in the group who are struggling to keep up, but there's also people in the group that are keeping up just fine. There's a whole spectrum, and there's a million things that you said that I would love additional dialogue on. But we got some hands. JK, Philly, go for it.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. It's a good pleasure to meet you. Your work is just absolutely amazing. It's a gem. Let me go right into the questions and let's see. So you had mentioned at one point Joe sells devices. You'd spoken
Yes.
that the implosive capacitive device. You mentioned
Yes.
that I'm interested in the conditioning of the space or the vacuum.
Yes. Yes.
How it's a process of phase conjugate dielectric environment.
Yes.
Can you
Yes.
describe the mechanism that
Absolutely. Yes.
forms this phase conjugate structure?
Yeah, I spent many days in Joe Sell's living room in Lismore at the time. So the physics was Joe had concentric metal pipes. I think they were steel. And actually, he had to know the direction in which those pipes were extruded so the crystal structure was contiguous enough. And by the way, the diameter of those pipes should be optimized by Planckfire.com into implosive capacitance. Then the water going through the center of that pipe implosively would release the hydrogen atom. And it's true. He said that you would then start the process of releasing the hydrogen, but the implosive capacitance projecting into the longitudinal array means that the longitudinal energy propagating nearby would be required to condition the space. And I'm probably the only electrical engineer on the planet that could explain this, if I may say so way too humbly. But the thing is, actually, let me give you an example.
Sure.
If you're driving this thing along and you're running on imploded hydrogen, sometimes called hydrogen nanogases, there's 100 names for this. Magna gas, oh my God, Brown's gas, 100 names for HHO. But it's a certain quality of hydrogen and that hydrogen gas will proceed like a plasma and is syrupy. But if you drive that car running on 0-point energy hydrogen and you park over a railroad track, that thing is going to quit. And understanding the physics of why is instructive. It tells you why railroad tracks are murderous to the living Earth grid also. So the steel in that railroad track is the opposite of conditioned space. It is the wrong dielectric. Now, if you go to sleep in a house made of natural material and your aura can unpack non-destructively, which is called conditioning the space, you could then lucid dream because your aura can propagate. So conditioning the space is saturating the local dielectrics with the inertia of the longitudinal array non-destructively. The more natural high dielectric material, the more you can condition the space. The more ugly, horrible steel and aluminum, the less you can condition the space. Now, Joe Sell didn't understand all of that, but interestingly, Joe Sell only used the Bible to teach the physics too. So anyway,
Well,
how am I
great.
doing on your question?
Yeah, that's a fantastic. I think it leads into the next question. And you mentioned on other video YouTubes the Vericona effect, or biofield, toroidal plasma field, or negotropic field. If an object in the vacuum carries a structured electrostatic field with specific charge distribution, does its permittivity need to align with the vacuum's resonant structure in order to reduce inertial resistance to survive? Is this alignment necessary a prerequisite for anomalous field propulsion effects?
Well, that's a beautiful way to say it. I think a wonderful example to start the dialogue and how to think about your question is how the material in the pyramid works. So it's absolutely exquisitely aligned with that array. I mean, exquisitely aligned. Oh God, dodecahedron, cosine, earth grid,
Mm,
perfect. North-south, four-wave mixing, perfect. That's embedded, man. And super dielectric and super dimagnetic, high dielectric and high piezo. The right exquisite combination of piezo and high dielectric means precisely that permittivity and permissivity, which enables efficient embedding and charge distribution in that array. The only actual translation of the word heaven, hey ave, by the way, where
mm.
charge takes flight.
That's great. Final question. I know you're sensitive of time. If in that vacuum, if one were to engineer this charge collapse to a zero time impedance, zero radiation resistance, would this cause FTL, faster than light? Can that object survive based on impedance matched tuning?
Well, essentially, to live in the longitudinal array, you gotta be able to embed in faster than light components, or you're dead. I mean, Raymond Chow's thousands of measurements of faster than light velocities famously were between 1.5 and 1.7 times c the speed of light, centered accurately
Mm,
around golden ratio. Hello. But the number of golden ratio multiples times the speed of light which are embedded in your array equals the number of dimensions you live in. I mean, how far your
mm.
Stargate goes. So the beginning, I mean, it's we actually have a slide about your question, which is where, oh no, yeah. So if you visualize this slide, oh, here I got the slide number. Okay, I'm now at slide number 5, and I'm answering your question. So on slide number 5, you see on the right, you got billiard balls in a row.
Yes.
Now, if you drop one billiard ball in that nest string of billiard balls all connected, then a billion billiard balls down the row, one billiard ball drops off precisely when you drop the first one, okay? Probably some components of that would be faster than light. The point is when the nodes in the array are locked into the stillness, hint Kundalini, hint bliss, the electric lightning bolt, what it feels like to inhabit a lightning bolt, Dannion Brinkley, the whole thing. So the superluminal components are enabled precisely the more they're locked into the stillness of that array. For example, the wars on Earth are always about Uru Asa Elem, Jerusalem, because it's the name of a Stargate, Uru Asa El, place of the phase shift. However, the bigger wars, the Orion Wars, guess what they're about? Also the Stargate, trapezium. It's a cube. So the more the mass you line up to implode, you get the biggest Stargate in this galaxy, which is actually how they bribed Anu to marry the Draco that became Enlil, But it's all, and they're still fighting over Stargates. That's why they went to Sirius B, the Anak, because the sun is going around Sirius B, the son of our sun. That's the Stargate locally, as Cruttenden proved at loststar.com when he showed that physics completely screwed up the physics of precession. That's why I think that this, what's his name, who defined this lightning gadget by the timing of precession, and he got precession ain't 26,000 years. No, it's 24,000 something 300, which is, by the way, a Planetary number. So it's a long story, but the physics of the centripetal force of what's called stargates and this ability to embed in higher frequencies than the speed of light entirely depends, literally, precisely upon embeddability. That's the summary.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Nathaniel.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Great questions. And I know Chief had some as well. And then I just wanted to put in there too, and I think everybody else probably feels very similar way. I'm incredibly grateful how much you've integrated and articulate not just the physics, you have the equations and things to back it up, your work and your experience, but also the esoteric dynamics. It's not many people in those that will merge the two realms, and you've done it for so long and so naturally that it really helps merge things, I think, for a lot of people. It's really fantastic. Thank you.
I hope I'm not talking too fast, but
You're great.
Kundalini will do that for you. But the questions are fun so far, so I'm happy to have more questions or whatever, or we can go on.
Yeah, go for it, Chief.
I was gonna ask two quick questions. One that relates to the Joe cell. It sounds like conditioning the state space is the same thing Stanley Meyer was talking about, tickling. Voltage tickling the state space?
Yes, and that's, in fact, if the space is conditioned, then it can take less energy to tickle it. Exactly. And by the way, Stanley Meyer's key frequency, 10,000 hertz. Guess what? Planck fire, golden ratio times Planck. Bingo.
Wow. I had the same thought the first time I actually stumbled upon your work. That's incredible. And then the second one was, is this longitudinal array, the stillness, literally the cosmic microwave background, that lowest frequency wave?
Well, in the same way you can measure Kundalini by measuring the output of adenosine diphosphate to triphosphate teeter-totter bond at 1.91 angstrom. Scan the spine, you got where Kundalini is and is not. Absolutely. In the same way that the waveguide for Kundalini exists in the phonon array of the body in the galaxy. So the permissive points, obviously, for the bloodstream of microwave is precisely the longitudinal array. Let me give you a practical example. After Bob Dratch, microwave scanning emissions technology, scanned the spine of my friend Wendy Thacker and interpreted the blockages in her spine based on the measurement of microwave emission, 1.91 angstroms, ATP, basically cellular fire. When he was done describing where the blockages were, she was crying. It was the history of trauma of her youth. Then he took that same microwave scanning emissions. It's a gold cross. Microwave antenna physics is the best intro to the physics of magic. Absolutely. Anyway, he took the same gold cross, incredibly high gain microwave amplifier, and scanned the horizon for biologic microwave exquisitely and proved that biologic microwave is exquisitely tuned and conducted precisely by the geometry of the Earth grid. So not only is the answer yes, but we can prove how.
Wow. It's super interesting because literally within the start of this year, I'm seeing papers published by the Chinese with names like atomic coherence induced non-Hermitian control of multimode EPR steering from cascading four-wave mixing.
Four-wave mixing is phase constant. Exactly. It's a waveguide. Absolutely. And yeah, it's about that cascade. And that's literally the bloodstream. And eventually, when you understand, like Temple of Serious Mystery just figured out, plasma becomes self-aware. He didn't figure out how plasma becomes self-aware, but it's absolutely his star idea today. How plasma becomes self-aware is highly instructive. The toroids literally implode recursively and phase lock with the nodes of the longitudinal grid. And that, for example, is specifically the physics of why toroidal ball lightning is always responding to telepathy.
That's super interesting.
I have a question. Oh, sorry. Keep going, Chief. Do you have something else to keep going with that line of thought?
Yeah, in Bedini and Bearden's book, it's on page 68. It says the waveforms from the Energizer are telling us a new story. If we take the scope and expand these waveforms out even further, around 50 megahertz, the waveforms look completely different, which means basically that the ions were moving backwards or gaining energy through a collapse, if I'm not reading that incorrectly. So it seems like Bedini and Bearden also have this frequency-dependent longitudinal array idea.
Bedini's over unity battery charging and Bearden's MEG, the MEG. These were all examples of recursive charge in the case of the transformer, or also Sparky Sweet's vacuum triode preamp. Same story. All of these stories are tuning recursion, either in inductive, capacitive. There's 100 ways to tune recursion, but the tuning algorithm is always blankfire.com. And if that recursion is perfected, then you will have charge collapse, which gains energy during charge collapse, which defines all 0-point energy devices for sure.
And their 50 megahertz number is close to Fly ratio?
50 megahertz. I'd have to check. 50 is absolutely magical. It's actually 449.99 something. 50 hertz is the most often mentioned healing frequency in all the cancer literature, for example. It's very phase conjugate. That's why countries on the planet with 50 hertz can do nanotech industry, the most important industry on the planet. Countries like America with 60 hertz have zero chance of ever doing carbon nano growth. This is called Tesla's mistakes.
Wow, thank you so much. I have endless more questions, but I'm sure we want to keep it moving.
Was there any other questions should we do, or should we want to continue the...
Yeah, one more just on those dynamics. And Chief, I definitely want you to ask I know your B question later on at some point, so definitely hold on to that, whatever else you got as well. So we're talking about you're talking about the railroad tracks, aluminum buildings, hindering or dampening the aura, if you will,
Yes.
or biomagnetic field. And I really like how you talk about lucid dreaming being a indicator of, being prepared for death and whether we're able to implode our own field and steer our own plasma. So I think you've used that terminology before. I think it's a good one people can relate to because everybody has dreams. Not everybody has lucid dreams, but everybody has dreams. The question I have would extend more, I guess, probably into conceptual physics and your articulation of what happens to the soul after we die, steering projection, the plasma in a room, and also astral projection. And we've had questions about, so what if you touch aluminum while you're astral projecting? I could see it collapsing the way back to your body, but let's say you're disembodied, your avatar is dead, there's nothing to return to, and now you're a ghost or a soul that is now transversing out of the body. What happens if you collapse that wave then? Where does it go?
Yes, the physics of lucid dreaming slide is slide number 152. Note on the bottom right, the university study on the frequencies most triggering lucid dreaming, 25 and 40, are reasonably close to the phi harmonic cascade, which later then we proved theraphi.net and now phiray.com is a dramatic lucid dreaming trigger. And here's the slide from our Theraphi website blog showing the triggering of lucid dreaming with the same Planck fire frequency cascade of implosion, causing the aura to be centripetal. So when the aura gets centripetal, what's squeezed out the squirt gun in this case is the ringing, and I literally mean like how you would ring a rag, the ringing of the DNA helix as it recursively braid implodes, in many slides about that at goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. So the DNA ring implodes phonon braids, and we know the phonon braid of DNA is the physics of how Bliss and heart coherence braid DNA. We've measured that. So the DNA braid implodes and compresses and spits out at the center of the implosive braid of DNA coherent longitudinal EMF called the Kesjan body, the rainbow light body, or the Ba from the Ka. So that coherent radiance is then the ability to embed in the local array and the trigger for lucid dreaming, obviously. And now what gives you leverage to trigger ability to steer in that dream? It's called intent, but what does that mean? If you think about it, if you visualize one Hebrew letter accurately, once you know that it's a simple spiral on a torus at the correct phase angle to embed in the tetracube. So if you visualize one Hebrew letter accurately, like a rabbi making a golem, and fills the optical cavity, then that angle of plasma donut at the correct angle is spit out, programming smoke rings into phase lock angles, the physics of creation, actually, which is controlling the phase angle of your optical cortex as a magnetic domain donut. And when you spit out the donuts in the right symmetry sequence, obviously. So that's an introduction to surfing the long wave Uncle Joe. I mean, riding the long wave, I mean, surfing. So it's literally a symmetry index algorithm, which determines your ability to embed in that array. How to steer in a lucid dream. Another example would be, the painful mind meld with an Orion Queen Mog Draco is called a vice-like grip. Well, what made their aura so vice-like? Hint, centripetal force. So people who are asking me, and we have people who are our friend here, the astral Orma, they need to get more centripetal in their astral battles. How do you do that? You get your aura more centripetal. We teach brainwave, golden ratio, etc., measurements to get more centripetal, because either get centripetal or get dead. That's the bumper sticker. But anyway, so this is the intro to the leverage in the array, the physics of lucid dreaming. So when your aura gets coherent enough to have longitudinal emissions, that's the beginning of physicsofsoul.com, absolutely. And that array called the astral is actually other harmonics, specifically golden ratio Planck harmonics, into the longitudinal array. And the more axis of spin symmetry nested in your aura, that's the number of dimensions you live in that array.
Quick question. Can you think of that as planets?
Well, we have a slide. Oh, we have a slide about that. We have a slide about it. No. The slide is just Kepler deciding that planetary orbitals are a platonic nest. Guess what? He was right.
Wow.
The reason golden ratio is the dominant geometry of orbital mechanics, especially solar system orbital mechanics, is because, that's the smoking gun, golden ratio stabilizes gravity and therefore atmosphere and therefore planet life. So absolutely, platonic nest is planetary orbitals. That's the point.
So does life exist on Earth because of it sitting as a dielectric resonating antenna between like Saturn and Jupiter and the sun? Or
well, think of millions of years ago. Thoth is making a plan. How many million years do you think it took to arrange that almost all the Schumann harmonics are within 1% of golden ratio times Planck? How much planning do you think that might have taken?
I have no idea, but oh my God, wow.
It's like you had to tune the spin rate and the mass and the dielectric. This is called planet taming. The whole book on that, 2/3, David Myers and David Percy, the definition of planet taming. Basically, one example is that the pyramids are at tetrahedral latitudes because if you phase lock localized spin to zodiacal spin, you stabilize gravity and atmosphere. That's called planet taming. Gravity is the name for that implosion.
Wow. So my last question was, do bees do this? Are bees 0-point energy anti-gravity machines?
Well, there's lots of evidence that birds that fly thousands of miles are using 0-point energy. And nobody ever told the bee that hydrodynamically they're treating air molecules like they were fluid. I think there's 1,000 ways why bees are 0-point. But one nice example, when it wasn't Kozyrev, it was Grebennikov. He walked over a hill of ancient insect skeletons and he started to float. And then he investigated, and the ancient skeletons were super dielectric with the cavity structure effect, which means they made gravity. How did the ancient insects get their skeletons such high dielectric with the right symmetry called cavity structure effect? Visualize a Valentine. Implode capacitance and you make gravity. How did the bees learn how to do that? Well, ask Grebennikov. goldenmean.info/gravity politics. Dozens of pictures.
That's awesome, Dan. And I'm sure we'll have more questions as we go along, but please do continue with your presentation and then we'll take questions from other people as well afterwards.
Okay, so I carry on. So we were at the next slide in the series, which is slide number. So we finished about how the EM drive made gravity by making a microwave caduceus implode and spit out longitudinal. So moving to slide number 20. Slide number 20 is simple. It's just a graphic of the hundreds of physical and biological variables predicted accurately by golden ratio times Planck. Literally charge implosion, which is the origin of all negentropy. That's self-organization. 3 exact radii of hydrogen, the exact height versus diameter of DNA, the precise wavelengths of the only 2 frequencies that make photosynthesis. Hello, photosynthesis exists precisely, and I do mean precisely, by golden ratio times Planck phase conjugation. Fractalfield.com/fractal photosynthesis. And by the way, the British foot, exactly. It's, in other words, all sacred dimension is simply a name for charge collapse. And the Schumann harmonics and the brainwave harmonics of bliss and the LF of the Mayer wave, the Venus year, Earth year, galactic year, precession, etc. So this is all at plankfire.com and also the companion site, which is lfi.link. Hundreds of variables. And here in slide number 21, we have the actual mathematics and examples from the cascade and examples of where, for example, the 131 hertz, precisely Planck fire of the Ark of the Covenant. Remember, the Ark of the Covenant was a name for a capacitor that reduced radioactivity because of charge collapse, which was its primary function. And so on slide number 22, you have the plasma vortex related to Schauberger's repulsine, and understanding that if you just look at the simple piezo water vortex there on the right, slide number 22 from Schauberger, that the piezo water vortex, if the angle of that vortex is tuned, related to 1630 degrees, so that the conversion to longitudinal is optimized, and that vortex will only work in water if it's highly piezo. And even the mercury vortex that also made gravity needed doping with iron, how it became red mercury, and there was a wetting agent. So the bottom line is those vortex only made gravity if their angle was correct to collapse, implode the charge into directional longitudinal EMF named gravity. So this was the famous slide of Einstein's mistakes looking back. So this is where slide number 23, how a charged vortex makes gravity, and we'll move to 24. Slide number 24. Any confused physicist who tries to tell you gravity bends space-time, an unhelpful, unclear use of language, first of all, doesn't know what gravity is, charge acceleration due to fractal implosion, and two, doesn't know what time is, relative spin rate for charge only, and thus has not even begun to deal with the most elementary physics of Sufi. I think this is fun. Only love bends the light, therefore only love creates. Remember, if charge doesn't move into a circle, it doesn't store the inertia called mass. So there's no creation without bending light, that's for sure. But why does low phi, long wave phi ratio, love bend the light? Well, so the implosive conjugate Planck fire compression of charge, which causes gravity, is the only way the wave path of charge is bent. Only love bends the light. Meaning the wave path of charge is bent, fractally attracted from charge in a line, named energy, to charge in a spin circle, storing inertia, named mass. Hence, creation. Long wave, low phi, phi ratio embedding. If you look at the Centric waveform for love, the max pressure in the squeeze you give to say I love you reaches max pressure precisely at golden ratio, thousands of measurements, Manfred Klein, touch of the emotions, goldenmean.info/touch. So long wave phi ratio is thus the origin of all centripetal implosive light bending and creative forces. The reason charge acceleration, named gravity, speeds up time is also trivially simple after you learn time is only a name for relative spin rate. Don't let them give you this crap about time space being bent. It's just their way of confusing you because they're confused. The toroidal spin of charge, the definition of mass, the toroidal spin of charge, the definition of mass, will naturally convert some of the energy of acceleration by optimized translation of vorticity, which is how golden ratio is defined in hydrodynamics. So it will convert some of the energy of acceleration into the acceleration of spin rate at the center of the vortex, named time. So now you know exactly why acceleration changes time. It just affects the spin rate. And the experience of spin density, the best instruction on how to visualize that is why you must relive your whole life in the 1 second before you die. There's that compression requirement to embed in the array, which is highly spin dense. And the only way to successful death is that compression into that array. So the experience of spin density is required to succeed with compression. For example, why Daniel Brinkley had 3 near-death experiences from lightning. So slide number 25. This is old. The symptoms of Einstein-induced insanity by Dan Winter. Not having a clue why objects fall to the ground. 2, thinking the speed of light is a speed limit. That was pretty dumb. 3, thinking it takes infinite energy to go through the speed of light. Wrong. Thinking all action at a distance is spooky. We just explained longitudinal coherent interferometry is the physics of all action at a distance. Rather than call it entanglement, you should call it phase conjugate embedding. Next, not having a clue what the ether is made of. Is it a compressible superfluid whose compression and rarefaction is charge, plus and minus? This mistake reflects the schizophrenia rampant within fractally unified field science. Some who might still believe gravity and electromagnetism were made of different substance. We recommend hospitalization for schizophrenia to those. Incorrectly and weirdly believing space-time is somehow bent. Wrong. Instead of clearly understanding precisely what is bent by gravity, for example, is the path of compressible charge wavefront trajectory. The wavefront of the charge trajectory is what is bent, and it is not space-time that's bent. Last, not understanding that both mass and time are simply created and defined simply by the inertia and period of charge rotation. So you get charge to rotate, you measure the inertia stored, that's called mass. You measure the period, that's called time. So charge rotation is the only definition and origin of both space and time, of both mass and time. And now we skip to slide number 27. Well, it's about Stephen Hawking, so we're not going to carry on here. On slide number 28, we're talking about, this is all useful. We don't need to do all this now. I just wanted to go to slide number 30, where we zoom in a little bit on Tesla's mistakes, which we already discussed. Our purpose isn't to pick on these guys who made the best contributions in history. Our purpose is to understand by making those contributions, they also had to make huge mistakes. And so Tesla really, by not understanding the origin of life, because he didn't understand phase conjugate compression, really didn't understand how longitudinal interferometry worked, not only did he not succeed with global wireless power, he did not succeed with plasma interferometry, his ray gun. I mean, we even know how Luke Skywalker's lightsaber worked once you understand how you use microwave to make coherent longitudinal interferometry. Anyway, slide number 31 is about, here's on top is the frequencies which Antoine Priory used to heal thousands of cancers, 3, 10, 32, 80. And here is Dan Winter's equation above, which is the actual frequencies we used for therify.net, and now even more powerfully at phi-ray.com. So this is an incredible time reversing potentially, but it's at least very negentropic, and it's very blissful. It's extreme Kundalini trigger. I can tell you that from personal experience. So check out phi-ray.com. And this is the same harmonic series in the breath, in the brain waves, in the HRV. It's all the same harmonics, and it maps perfectly on the Schumann harmonics, which is the brainwave harmonics, which is the spine liquid harmonics. They're all the same phase conjugate pump wave. Slide number 32 is Tom Bearden's book, Gravitobiology, in which he shows that, for example, if you take in a dark basement, no light, and you run a wire to the roof of a copper plate, and the sunlight is shining only the longitudinal wave on the copper plate on the roof, and it connects to a copper plate in the basement, radiating that longitudinal wave, those plants will grow wonderfully with zero light. So it is the longitudinal component of the solar emission, which is fertilizing. The reason is simple, for the same reason that stone circles are primarily designed to trigger seed germination, one of the primary functions of pyramids. Also, that centripetal force is the origin of life, and only the longitudinal component of the EMF can contribute to centripetal force. It's simple. If your wave's going up and down and hits the sides, it ain't going to squeeze well. If the wave's compressing accurately and reaching opposite sides symmetrically, longitudinal, 4 directions, then you can get implosion. That's the reason gravity exists, and that's the reason seed germination exists. So obviously, it's only the longitudinal component of the EMF which has anything to do with the centripetal charge called gravity. And we see later in the slides here how this describes the physics of nuclear critical mass, and this carries on. Slide number 35 is recursion in the imploding donut. In slide number 37 through 39 are the Platonic physics of the atomic table we already discussed. So this is slide 37. See how the Platonic nest is the only symmetry of the electron shells, as for example at slide number 38. SPDF subshells is just a name for a torus. A D is tetracubic, and the S suborbital is toroidal. The pi suborbital is tetracubic, 6 vortex, 6 electron. And the D and F suborbitals are dodecacosa. It's very simple. You nest that Platonic nest, and you're done with making the atomic table. And that's in slide number 39. Also, the only physics of the symmetry of the nuclear hadrons. Like nuclear hadrons, their nest is called tetracube octa ecosa. Hello, the work of the famous chemist Moon at the University of Chicago. Yeah, and the next slide here is not slide 40, about Kepler being right. Slide 40. Kepler being right that a platonic nest is the reason planetary orbitals exist, because specifically charge collapse is how you make the gravity that holds planets together, which is also how you have to have planetary orbitals or they're not negotropic. And slide number 42, we go into the physics of love, which we kind of discussed. But I'm going to put pause on this part here. So this is the point at which my voice starts to fade just a little bit. And maybe if we alternate with questions, we'll...
Yeah, great. That'd be awesome. I know we have a few people requesting to come up too, but Nathaniel, want to share something? And Cymatic and Chief, and then we'll get some others up as well.
Yeah, I would defer to Cymatic here, and I had a couple of questions. Maybe in general, we could save them just checking some understandings about how interference patterns might be at play.
Yes.
Also, understanding tau or Majorana neutrinos in this context, and like the small fluctuations. But let me kick it over to Jane, and also Hollow Cipher is here, who I would like to have a question from as well. So
I just wanted to pop in, not with a question, but just to let everyone know that Tufan, which is Dan's associate, and who creates all sorts of really cool models, is in the chat and has posted a link in the, I think you call it the pill, and information in there. So thank you, Tufan, and welcome.
Tufan is geometricmodels.org. He has all of our tools and toys and the Star Mother kit and many things. Geometricmodel.org. Geometricmodels.org. Tufan, thank you for coming. Cool.
Yeah, and let's go. We've also got in the pill down there, the chat on the bottom right. Mr. Wolf also posted he has a Therify device at home. It's on either side of his bed, at top, or the head and the foot of his bed. So there's definitely avid Dan Winter technologists and enthusiasts in the chat as well. And Chief, unless you had something, love to go hear from Hollow Cipher and God Sauce.
Yeah, just real quick. I've been writing down notes as you're talking. So basically, our gravity is very special here on Earth, and longitudinal EMF is like sound, and it resonates as the light radiates, all from this toroidal moment, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Sound is a useful example of longitudinal propagation, but longitudinal EMF is not the same as sound. Longitudinal EMF is the compressional component of the electromagnetic wave, where the compression variation is traveling, the wave of compression is traveling parallel to the direction of propagation, which means when it arrives, it can squeeze symmetrically. Example, tsunami. The tsunami under the ocean travels at the speed of a jet plane, and a boat on the top does not know the tsunami just went underneath. That is a longitudinal. When the tsunami arrives at the shore...
This space was downloaded via spacesdown.com. Visit to download your spaces today.
The taper of the shoreline, the curvature, converts the longitudinal component to the up and down transverse, and that's what kills you. But so the transverse is the heat-containing component of the EMF. So you have to switch back from the longitudinal propagation to transverse in order to store heat at a distance. And fusion energy on this planet would take a breakthrough if physicists understood that is the only physics of heat containment at a distance.
But the longitudinal array is like everything we see. It's everything that radiates light.
Well, where the interferometry is constructive, the primary component of that would be longitudinal, because the longitudinal inertia can bounce and be stored there. Obviously, every wave, like every wave in water, has some transverse and some longitudinal, but where the inertia is primarily longitudinal. The problem is that physics knows how to play with the longitudinal component of air and sound very well, but you ask a physicist how to pick up and send longitudinal EMF, and they'll scratch their head for a lifetime. It's like the Princeton Noosphere Project noticing that on 9/11, the capacitance of their random number generator predict when 3,000 people died at that moment. What they do not know is the capacitor they call a Josephson junction in the random number generator they're looking at for the Princeton Noosphere project to measure global emotion. In fact, that Josephson junction capacitance is more able to pick up the longitudinal component. That's the mechanism.
That's insane. That's literally how put-offs work too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Ground-
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's a long story. Yes. Yeah. Hal was working with Dave and a little bit too much military there, I think. But anyway, go ahead.
Awesome. That's great. Holocipher?
Hey, everyone.
Hello?
To get up on your.
Oh, we're losing you.
Can you hear me
Okay,
right?
it's breaking up for you too. Let me cycle you down, Holocipher, and back up. In the meantime, Godsauce, you have a question?
Yes, sir. Wonderful space. Nice to meet you, Mr. Winter. And winter is coming, isn't it? It seems like the mystery is connected all together, and that there's some kind of, I don't want to say condensate, but I'm going to use it because I'm such a nerd. It seems like there's a condensate connecting emotional things for humanity, almost like gnats or mosquitoes, and that the remote viewers are using this. And I've tried to, name it and give it physics terms and consider, how might it be utilizing humanity. And a lot of what you're saying, it just is perfectly meshes with this, and it's kind of blowing my mind.
I mean, it's like now that we know that lucid dreamers need the same thing as a telepath. If you're on a magnetic cross point, it's good. If you're not, it ain't so good. The same thing with cathedrals and labyrinths and remote viewing and astral projection. Magnetic line cross points enable all of that because they enable longitudinal. Another example, the reason Agnihotra has to happen at sunrise and sunset, hello, that's four-wave mixing longitudinal embedding. That's the reason it works and creates fertility. And condensate is, by the way, exactly the right word. I love it. And by the way, I see you're a Reiki teacher here. On our goldenmean.info/kit, Star Mother Kit graphic, the Reiki Master symbol dichomio origins actually is the angle to implosively embed in the cubit to the dodec, which is the turning point in all platonic nesting.
Dichomio,
so the
spirit power.
The dichomio of Reiki is the turning point to create implosive compression. Exactly. So that tells you the physics of Reiki, actually.
All right, I've forgotten everything else now, and I'm going to chew on that. Thank you, sir.
goldenmean.info/kit, Star Mother Kit. Thank you.
Beautiful question and dialogue. Thanks, guys. Holocipher, hopefully your audio is working a little better now. Okay.
We check 1, 2. Are you there?
Yeah. Yes, we got you.
Excellent. Well, Dan, it's I feel like you've been a part of a good amount of my alchemical transformations from a sort of pessimistic scientist into something that's willing to entertain the impossible, right? Because a lot of this from the classic physics is just like it doesn't match up, and we're having to, create patches in the software to move forward here. One of the things that really kind of stood out to me, and you were kind of riffing on this before with light and gravity interface, and there was something that was always bothering me. There's something that Bob Lazar said in one of his briefings, and I could never find it because I just didn't know. I wasn't looking up the right title. I didn't remember it. It was where he was doing a briefing in a military tent of some kind. It was small, like maybe room of 20. And somebody asked him in the audience, and I'd never heard him comment on this before. And he never commented on it again, as far as I know. So one of the guys in our community, Grider, took all of his interviews and put it into one sort of PDF. If you look up Grider and you want to follow this, it's on his tree link. And I downloaded the whole Lazar file because I'm like, it's got to be in there, right? So I put it into ChatGPT real quick, and I said, what was the frequency Bob was talking about? And it came up like immediately. And here's the thing, I knew it was a single digit frequency, which automatically puts us in the ELF range. All right. And I knew it was somewhere in the Schumann band, but it was 7.46 hertz. And that's exactly the frequency. I know that light takes to travel around our particular geometric circumference. So I
Yes.
want you to, like, I think this is worth kind of getting into, that there's some tie-in here with light and gravity intrinsically having to do with, you know, our
Well,
mass
it's a
ratio.
frequency signature. Yeah, it's a frequency
yeah.
signature precisely. The actual Schumann 7.29 hertz. I'm sorry, the theoretic Schumann Planck-Golden ratio is 7.29. The actual Schumann 7.83. And if you calculate that distance out, ratio 7.29 to actual 7.83, you come to the actual physics we've measured in dozens of pyramid sacred sites. The theoretical be 50, but the actual is 53. And now we know exactly why. Because the charge collapse on Earth, almost Planck fire, is retuned from 7.29 to 7.83 hertz. Now his number is about halfway between. Bottom line is, if you want gravity or 0-point energy, you must do only exactly that charge collapse. And that is the frequency signature. That's the point. And that's all at pyramidwirelesspower.com, the graphics of all those frequencies.
So would you say then the photon is somehow coupled to gravity in a unique geometric way, a torsion way? How, like, there's some interesting dynamics here to also the sort of the coupling between the sun seems to be playing like an intrinsic role. Like the other thing that kind of stands out is T. Townsend Brown's experiments were being affected by what he called sidereal radiation. And of course, these are intrinsically tied between lunar periods of 27-day and the inner rotational period of the sun at 27-day. And these can't be intrinsically connected in this synchronized way just by chance, right? So there seems to be like a spintronic resonator to the solar system that's coupled with gravity fundamentally.
The physics of astrology is almost exclusively coherent longitudinal interferometry, and the perpendicularity of the solar system with the galactic equator is the physics of the photon cloud and the physics of rapture. It is the ability to embed in the long wave coherently when they rise from the dead, for example. You do not want to be the left behind. That is coherent conjugate longitudinal interferometry, the only physics of astrology. Absolutely. And by the way, do you know why Townsend Brown was baking egg whites to make them float?
Sounds like a riddle here. Should I be guessing?
Well, he was optimizing the dielectric. And then if the dielectric adds curvature, then you have implosive capacitance, which is how you make longitudinal. So these things fit together perfectly. And yes, understanding astrology by the right phase angles, which is everything to do with, you know, we started by saying your telepathy and your healing and your magic and your therify and your plasma and your cathedral and your labyrinth and everything you do and your lucid dream and your death will all work better if you're at a magnetic cross node, but they will also all work better if you're at sunrise or sunset, or if you're at equinox or solstice, or if you're when the galactic equator goes perpendicular to the solar system equator. It's all about embeddability, and the longer the wave you can embed in, that's your leverage as you grow between dimensions.
So Dan, just one final up with this. Considering that the Giza pyramid, and I'm going to somehow speculate here that a mass amount of the megalithic structures were tuning into the Schumann base frequencies to sort of bolster or maybe even buffer planetary solar interaction effects. And we may be at the precipice of a sort of geomagnetic punctuated equilibrium like moment. Would it not sort of behoove us to sort of reignite the flame of what was?
In fact, we have conversations with Thoth every other day with friends here, and they're telling us it's urgent. You know, it's the bumper sticker, get centripetal or get dead. If we don't get more centripetal here, we don't have a prayer in the solar wind. And the dodecacosa exquisite geometry of every pyramid and sacred site on the planet is a good intro. Either you make gravity or you get blown away. It's absolutely, our survival depends on making gravity. And for that, we need to teach our scientists why object falls to the ground. goldenmean.info/gravity politics.
And was Buckminster Fuller the first one to tie in gravity and love together? Do you know
that? Who was? Sorry?
Buckminster Fuller. Who? Was he not the first one to tie gravity and love together?
Well, a lot of people.
And if you have any stories, like personally about him, I'd love to hear anything you got. Like particularly about his quantum model and how he came to the tetrahedron. I know it's kind of a finite geometric argument, but it's important because we get sometimes caught up in the weeds and we don't know what the fundamental ontology or the sort of first principles are that he kind of laid out.
Well, you know, I was at University of Detroit Architecture School with Bucky for a long time, but then I lived with him for a week in the Physics of Consciousness Symposium in Florence, Italy. And We personally discussed charge collapse in his vector flexor, which is stellated tetra octa, cube octa. And basically, his vector flexor was, in his idea of optimizing all structures with tetra for maximized use of material, this was genius. It was wonderful. It was optimized structural integrity. However, I have to say, and as an electrician, maybe this might sound like a criticism, Bucky did not have a clue of the meaning of charge collapse, charge implosion, and how that caused life force. And there were a lot of serious, I mean, those metal dodecaecosa geodesics are some of the most geopathic structures on the planet. I mean, the geodesic designed by Bucky and installed by Denver in our community in North Carolina in Waynesville Circle of Life, it was the most geopathic structure in history, practically. First of all, a sphere is geopathic by definition, but which means it's monoharmonic, the opposite of life. So, and even though later the collapse of the tetraocta cube, the vector flexor, was used by Tom Sawyer and many others, including Nassim, to model perfect charge collapse, which is wonderful. And perfect charge collapse is beautifully modeled by the vector flexor jitterbug, and it's on the website on the Star Method Kit. Bucky had no clue of anything to do with anything electrical ever. He was a very, very sweet man, but there are some limitations. That's just my humble 2 cents.
Yeah, it might have overwhelmed him. He seemed to focus really purely on the topological
and the mechanical.
interchangeability.
Yeah, and he was a genius, absolutely. but you know, electrically, unfortunately, and that's why the Buckminster Fuller Institute, those people, I'm sorry, but I think they're clueless. They do not know that all that geosphere dynamic stuff was creating geopathics architecturally horribly. He didn't know that a building had to implode capacitance to make life instead of death. He didn't know.
Which kind of gets us to Wilhelm Reich, right? Sorry, Chief.
Well, yeah, and see, by
and Einstein was actually supposed to evaluate that, remember? And he backed out because he couldn't explain the entropy coming from Reich systems.
Because he didn't understand charge. On the word orgone instead of using the correct electrical term, which is implosive capacitance due to alternating dielectrics. If they had used the right, and James DeMeo refused. I mean, I knew him for years, but the leading Reich teacher on the planet. And even his function of the orgasm, frankly, he didn't understand the function of the orgasm. He didn't understand anything about bliss. You know, Reich was a genius, but I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm picking on these people, but he didn't know that charge collapse was really the definition of orgone, didn't really know what implosive capacitance was, and he didn't know the function of the orgasm, even though he wrote a thick book on it. Didn't know what Kundalini was. I'm sorry, but you know, let's call it spade a spade here. Anyway, this is my humble double Scorpio opinion.
It's a fantastic perspective, Dan.
Thank you, thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And Dan, you're very free to speak here. I mean, you're in good company, and yeah, absolutely. Chief, I know you're about to pop in. Then we got Samayak Jewel, and we do have a few other speakers that are on stage and even waiting to speak, Dan. But I want to submit that to you. Would you like to engage in more conversation, or would you like to continue on with more of the presentation? It's totally your call.
Maybe let's do another question or two, and then I'd like to take a short break. And then anybody else or whatever.
Okay.
Flexible.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you want, so does it sound like once you do a question or two and you take a break, you want to come back for some more engagement after that? And we'll just talk amongst ourselves while you do that. Is that what it sounds like?
Yeah. In fact, you know what? I'm going to take a 2-minute right now.
Great.
I'm going to take a pee.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just give me 2. Yeah. Sorry.
No apologies. Glad to have you.
We got enough to stew on.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I may ask him when he gets back, it's all related here. I've been writing it down. Townsend Brown basically was looking for implosive capacitance, which is wave conjugation. Dan is basically saying that the structure of something makes function. And from how I understand gravity, it's acceleration towards Planck center, and it's structure dependent. So we're stuck in the Schumann of Earth.
But that's orgone. He said this is orgone energy.
That's what Wilhelm Reich called it. Yeah, but
with their hands up, I imagine you'd like to speak to Dan, so we'll wait till he's back around. I presume.
I'm just back. I'm here. Go ahead. Yes, can you hear me?
Please, yes, Jane.
My question can wait to the end, but what it is I wanted to hear about Dan's devices, the things you've created and what they're called, and a brief description of what they do. So, I mean, it can wait till the end because I know everyone has more technical questions.
Well, let me just do 2 minutes. The core devices were therify.net, which is now phi-ray.com, which took phase conjugation in optical conjugation in plasma, added phonon low frequency interferometry, perfect phase conjugate, low frequency phonon phase conjugate pump wave, and we achieved relatively high voltages, and we achieved pain reduction, inflammation reduction, no medical claims, only experimental, but it was very famous and very successful worldwide. Now, 2 to 4 times more powerful dramatically by adding a magnetic coil with the highest flux dense Schumann cascade in history, all in phase with the plasma and the phonon. Phi-ray.com. Incredibly blissful phonon trigger, reduce inflammation, reduce pain, meditation trigger, lucid dreaming trigger, kundalini trigger, remote viewing triggers. These are used for remote healing regularly. You can read all the stories on the websites. Now, there's some related, less expensive. So the Phi-ray is 1/4 the cost of the original Therify now, too. It's amazing. And now we have low-cost device. Piezofire.com takes all of that into simple, very low-cost piezo and Tesla coil technologies. And that gets pain reduction and inflammation reduction, all kinds of, you read stories, piezofire.com. And then we have plasmafire.com, which is in between those in cost and battery powered, and you can use it in nature, and it's amazing plasma. So basically, you phase conjugate phonons and phase conjugate optics in plasma and focus them, conjugate centripetally, broad spectrally, correctly, you get massive centripetal and negentropic result. Hey,
that sounds great.
But while I'm carrying on, I just want to give you a thing about gravity. Way to think about it. The G-ray of gravita, a G-ray is a name for a wave that can move from the line to the circle efficiently. And that's what makes life. It's a G-ray of Vita. It's the implosion, centripetal. And that's where we get our word Elohim from, too. The make the L or the phase shift is precisely how your aura goes from transverse to longitudinal, which we explained is the physics of soul.com, and how you obviously enter stargates and portals and lucid dreaming and successful death. So Elohim, to make the L and to make the G-ray, has the same meaning.
Excellent. I do have a follow-up question based on this gravity discussion. I have something I'd like to read for your comment to see if it jives with your model or what you make of it. If that would be fine with you.
Sure, go ahead. Yes.
Okay. So the idea here is, let me just preface by saying that you've mentioned that gravity is a difference of pressure in the vacuum, if that's right so far.
Voltage is a name for difference of pressure, so everything in the universe is a difference of pressure.
Yes, I didn't mean to oversimplify, but so here's the quote.
The implosion of pressure that makes a directional longitudinal, that's yes.
That's so here's the quote that I'd like to read. Gravitation can be understood as a dielectric gradient force in a polarizable vacuum. This arises due to local variations in Fresnel zones, which affect electromagnetic flux density and the vacuum's refractive index, denoted as KPV. The gravitational force, F little g, is proportional to the gradient of KPV squared, meaning that mass interacts with changes in the refractive index in a way that resembles gravity. One more paragraph. When electromagnetic waves from coupled oscillators interfere, they create moire patterns and Fresnel zones. This interference alters the local EM wave fronts, producing a Fresnel zone effect between oscillating mass sources. As a result, the local flux density increases, leading to a stronger gradient in electric permittivity, which in turn influences gravitational behavior.
Well, Fresnel zone essentially only means interferometry. It means a wave interferometry pattern, whether optical or electric. So it's a pretty in non-specific term. Now, the term dielectric gradient I don't think is helpful, actually. Dielectric refers to the efficiency of charge distribution in the meat in the sandwich in a capacitor. For example, if your house is made of organics, the dielectric is such that your aura can breathe. But a dielectric gradient is a pretty poor description of what's causing gravity. What's causing gravity is the implosion in the interferometry, which is specifically when the interferometry conjugate implodes due to fractal implosive compression, and that creates centripetal force. Literally, it creates suction out the center of the squirt gun, which is specifically what stumped Einstein, because he knew non-destructive charge compression meant the charge has to go somewhere after it goes through center, and could not figure that out. Now we know exactly where it goes. The charge at the Planck threshold is accelerated into longitudinal interferometry through harmonics of the speed of light, and that array is the bloodstream of gravity. So
if I think go ahead.
Well, calling it a dielectric gradient, I find unhelpful.
Yes.
It is
So if I understand the disagreement, it's that maybe the gradient is a two-dimensional representation of something that's a spiral, the
exactly.
collapsing. Yes.
Yeah. And there's no way to describe this phenomenon two-dimensionally, because the vortex has to be three-dimensional, actually, which is why Heaviside castrated Maxwell's equations quaternion when he took out the spin. There was nothing but shit left. Bearden got that right.
And that's what you call implosive capacitance?
Yes. Implosive capacitance is a reasonable name for it, because the phase velocities can implode, interfere constructively, and that the charge can then experience acceleration toward the center of that vortex, which is named gravity.
Are you saying it has a cavitation then?
The cavitation is not a bad word for it, because when it hits the Planck threshold, the suction experienced is because it's spit out through harmonics faster than the speed of light, but the inertia is not lost. So Einstein was right in that sense. It had to be non-destructive compression. What he didn't know is only fractal Golan ratio could enable that, which is how and why fractality causes gravity. Many physicists already knew that, but they didn't know what electric fractal was till me.
Well, if I could, I know we have several hands. I wonder just about plasma toruses and oscillations, lattices, vortical lattices, this kind of breathing aspect of conducting waves and modulating between differences. I wonder if you might have anything to say about well, actually, scratch that.
Well,
if you'd rather talk about linear, that would be my big question. I know your time is short, but linear is, I think, a way forward to fix the future, and I'm hoping. But anyhow.
Well, a phonon geometry in phase conjugate optical plasma, noble gases, in therify.net, now firay.com, is a beautiful example of the vortex in the optical noble gas plasma, enabling that implosive negentropy and longitudinal propagation. And it's a longitudinal propagation out coherently, which is the only definition of the negentropy and healing effect for sure. So that, implosion in the plasma vortex is a good introduction to how, for example, toroidal ball lightning learned telepathy, because it imploded recursively, embedded into the longitudinal array. And you can bet when that ball lightning decides where it wants to sit, it's going to find the longitudinal nodes the same way aboriginals did.
Dan, I love your work. I really love your work. It's inspired a lot of my work. And I especially like your thoughts on architecture. I wanted to know what your thoughts are on this technique with the Heart Math Institute, where you concentrate on appreciation in your chest heart region, and it influences brain waves, heart waves, respiratory waves. And I also wanted to get your input on the use of nano gold. I've heard you talk about these different aspects. I just wanted to hear what they are now.
Yeah, HeartMath, Rollin McCready, and Doc learned from me how to take their first EKG. They learned from me the definition of heart coherence, and they got it wrong. They still do wonderful work, though. Their definition of heart coherence is simply learning to breathe at 0.1 hertz, which is helpful. It's not actually. Harmonic inclusiveness is actually the definition of coherence. We define the history of heart coherence. I'm credited in the medical literature of inventing the word heart coherence because I discovered how to measure its second order power spectrum. It's all at realheartcoherence.com. Point is, though, still, the Heart Math Institute work, simplistic, still quite useful, and learning to breathe the 10-second breath, which they call coherence, is useful. It's a good beginning because that's a phase conjugate multiple 0.1, actually. It's a Planck number. So and it is defined by the control of breath. And the breath, actually, when you're breathing 0.1 hertz, the next step would learn to breathe the cascade, which leads to Schumann, which is the brainwave harmonics, which would be golden ratio, obviously. So there's a lot of next steps that they didn't get to. Rollin and Doc, I was a little pissed at them at the time because I invented heart coherence and taught them all about starting and doing their first EKG spectrum analysis. And they finally managed to forget to mention my name, but that's okay. I wish them well from a distance. But then your other question about monatomic gold. We knew Barry Carter and David Hudson very well. David Hudson was unaware that his chemically derived gold monoatomics were quite dangerous for burning holes in the aura, actually. Naturally derived monoatomics are much safer. What do they call them? They're derived from aloe vera, actually. And there's lots of, and the deep ocean water derived monoatomics, Ormus from deep ocean has natural sources. The reason that David Hudson's creation was so dangerous, actually purely chemically derived, was that the charge implosion there was not embedded in the symmetry phase discipline of pure organic sources, really. There's a lot of reasons. And he didn't even realize that, if you consumed too much synthetic Ormus, it was actually fractionating to attention span, which relates to the physics of pure intention, which is what a shareable wave is. So there's a whole psychological science to Ormus, which David Hudson really didn't understand. But, he was a pioneer. Now, we have friends, it's Chaz in Sedona, priestessalchemy.com, who was the Ormus maker for Pat Flanagan after I introduced them, who was much more understanding of the subtle psychology thereof. And there are a lot of related products, including the ash derived from Agnihotra, which is a form of Ormus, actually. Very healing, very natural. But basically, all of those substances are a wave guide to conjugate implosion, which can be used biologically, but need to be used intelligently.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. I really enjoy all your material, and thanks for giving so freely a lot of information for us to, look at and absorb. I really appreciate all your work.
Yeah, and please ignore if some of what I say, like about heart math, sounds like pure ego, or like when I criticize Dan Willis for not understanding how a fire crystal works. My passion or excuse here is that it's not about saying that I invented something. That's actually boring. No, it's about saying they miss the pure principle, and therefore the teaching is not empowering. That's why I'm complaining about certain people.
And I think it's great, Dan. I think the way that you articulate that, I can certainly feel that it's not coming from a place of spite. It's articulating the principles, articulating the concept, tracing the pathway.
I hope so. My lady friend is very good critic here, and she'll tell me if there's too much ego.
Awesome. And Queen, thank you very much for your question. I'm going to cycle you down because we do have other speakers and we have limited space on here. So please don't anybody feel offended if you move down from
I'll go
back to
as
listener.
well. Thank you very much. This was awesome.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, really.
Looks like we have a question from Another World or Soul Soliloquy. Go ahead.
Hi, Dan. And you can cycle me down, Aaron, after I'm done asking this. My question is that you had mentioned Kepler and his Mysterium Cosmographicum nesting of platonic solids. And in the context of the solar system, in terms of like thinking about it in terms of mirror symmetry and recursive nesting, like I had found it odd that in the 1500s you had a lot of development of things like not in terms of the origination, but the popularization of things like polyphony, and even with Prometheus, there's polygraphia. And so it had me wondering if you had considered Kepler's nestings of platonic solids in terms of the idea that you have the astronomical, like heliocentric sort of nesting, but you also could have a sort of person-centric nesting, so that you'd have this sort of, especially if you think of it in terms of the development of astronomy physically, but then the development of our cultural modeling or cartography of, from our perspective, so that you have a sort of kind of recapitulation almost, but in our own mapping of that. And and if you did that right, that if that would sort of provide a kind of mirror symmetry of the of those, so in a way it's kind of like a dual perspective, or like a double loop of the platonic solids.
Well, yes, that's beautiful. What we're saying specifically is a platonic nest, which tetracube into dodecacosa absolutely is the only way to do it, is golden ratio. So it's simply an introduction to golden ratio. That's what platonic nest is, which is an introduction to charge collapse, which is the only definition of alchemy, non-destructive charge collapse, and the accurate definition of planetary orbitals and the harmonics of the breath and the physics of Kundalini and the physics of how atoms are built. So it is all of the above, precisely and beautifully, yes.
Awesome. It was a fantastic question. Let's see, Rose and then Jared.
Howdy, Daniel. It's an honor to be up here. I love your energy. And I guess my only question was with the heart on earth coherence. Are you familiar with Frank Chester's work and his study of like sacred geometry? And he dubbed also the chestahedron as his like
Yes.
kind of own thing. Yeah. I was wondering if you could kind of like talk about your thoughts on that.
The chestahedron was a creative variation on dodecacosa versus the stellated tetra, which is cubocta, I believe. And it's a beautiful, I'm not sure we actually got an electrical meaning for that metaphor, actually. And I'm not an expert on his work.
Well, his thing is basically that if you take the chestahedron and you spin it on the same axle that the heart sits in our chest, it creates a bell shape in like the fifth dimension or the fourth, right? And then he like relates it back to ancient Egypt, where there's like depictions of bells and things like that. And so like he takes it and breaks it down so that you can really understand how our earth and our heart and our chest is really like energetically the same as the earth in the universe, right?
Well, that's beautiful. You know, the layers of heart muscle are precisely 7 in precisely this spin, tilt, symmetry angles of the tetrahedron, the 7 arrows, as it were. And that's a beautiful introduction. And you extend that, you have tetracube and cubocta, which is the intro to chestahedron in your chest. I would say that if you, at the point at which that becomes a golden ratio stellation, which is at the dodecacosa extension of the tetracubic, the dodecacosa stellation generates precisely a golden mean spiral down that 60-degree cone, nesting infinite dodecacosa. And I've animated that beautifully, goldenmean.info/grail, at the best animation of the Holy Grail in history. And that's precisely when that spiral rotates in 3D and makes the grail. It's a bell. It's the perfect ringing bell. It's the fusion device. And he's right, you know, that bell is the perfect ring. And that actually is, now we know that's not just heart radiance, but it's the physics of hydrogen. I would say one more thing here, just a little, is that I have a life history of measuring power spectra in the EKG. And EKG power spectra is always harmonics of 2 in the octave, and never harmonics of 5, almost never, actually, even though the breath harmonics will use phi to overlay the heart harmonics. But it's only when you get to the brain that you get phi harmonics, and that's very significant. In other words, the heart, the EKG phonon geometry tetracubic, fundamentally, as the 7 layers of heart muscle are, is structural. It creates the structural stability within which you can then superpose the implosion of the grail and the bell, which requires the golden ratio of the brain waves. So actually, the EKG itself doesn't make bliss. It sets up the necessary higher voltage structure, but until you get golden ratio in the EEG and in the spine liquid pump, you don't actually get the bliss phenomena and the perfect bell. That's just metaphoric.
Okay, I'll wait. I know we're on to the next thing, but if you do have time today, I would love to hear you talk about SEX, right? I would love to hear your intimacy and like how far down you go in there, but thanks.
In the X array, in the what array?
And the SEX, I would like to hear you talk about the intimacy and and the ecstasy and all of that. Thanks.
Well, what we're saying basically, bliss process is the only way to get the kind of immune system that gets immortal. So you get to critical mass of the centripetal compression in a cathedral doing the sacred dance, sacred gymnastic, whatever it is, that imploded the capacitance. The rose has to pack before it can unpack. So you absolutely need that experience of compression before you can unpack radiantly. And that is the definition of bliss. And that perfected unpacking is the only way actually to get a soul, for sure. Physicsofsoul.com. So the physics of bliss is essential, not only because it's the definition of immune health, but harmonic inclusiveness predicts vitality. Harmonic inclusiveness defines bliss, and harmonic inclusiveness is the medical definition of the only way to measure immune health in HRV.
And harmonic inclusiveness is wave conjugation?
You spectrum analyze the low frequencies of the heart, and you check for harmonic inclusiveness, and you decide how much immune health you got. It just happens that the harmonic inclusiveness cannot go to max without golden ratio, as in the spine liquid pump harmonics superposed on HRV harmonics, which is the breath, which is the definition of the spine liquid pump physics of Kundalini.
So if I can bring it back to Townsend Brown and bees, you were saying earlier structure makes function. Would just a slight frequency increase from Schumann be anti-gravity? Like literally bumblebee anti-gravity?
The cavity structure effect in the insect skeleton's high dielectric capacitance is basically a name for the fact that you've got a super dielectric, the insect skeleton, which is very permissive to charge propagation. And then you arrange that in the geometry, and I said visualize a Valentine, the geometry of implosion, concavity perfected, and then the capacitance implodes. And that's why insect skeletons make gravity, as in Grebennikov, golden mean.info/gravity politics. And that gravity created by the insect skeleton is because the capacitance implodes, because you got super dielectric, and then you arrange the molecular geometry into implosive curvature like a Valentine.
Absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for everything. How many people on Earth know that you've discovered gravity? I mean, all these people talk about UFO disclosure and stuff, but never mention your name.
It started by learning how a mercury vortex makes gravity. They had to put enough iron powder in the red mercury to make it flux permissive, and then the angle of that vortex had to implode out the longitudinal directionally, and that can be done. We've done it with water. Capacitive water is in the repulse, so the water highly piezo can do it, but not as efficiently. Even the mercury vortex is not an efficient way to make gravity, but it's a good introduction to physics.
We don't have to go down that road. I just want to say thank you for everything, and there's a lot behind what you're saying right there. That's pretty incredible. Wow.
And it's so fundamental. Your governments would tell you knowing that is a threat to national security, but I say that knowing that is the only way to understand how your mind works, because the plasma vortex inside your head has exactly the same physics and will not be directional until you understand.
I'm glad you brought up national security, because it seems like many people would choose national security over, quote, free energy. And
Yeah, and basically free energy is the wrong word. It's actually implosion energy, and it's free only when you understand charge distribution.
And you also said that it started back when they made that mercury vortex, which is a pretty incredible time frame.
The Nazis learned it from the Vedas, from the Vimana was a mercury vortex. And then also the other aspect, you got a trace amount of iron powder making the mercury red for flux permissive, but then a trace level of radioactivity made it quasi superconductive, like the Paul Brown nuclear battery. And the combination was their first powerful gravity ships, and they put them in submarines, and they took over a big chunk of the solar system. They got ejected by the Galactic Federation, but they've retreated to Aldebaran, and they're still powerful.
That's absolutely incredible. I mean, living here in America, even recycling is fake. So to hear that is just absolutely mind blowing.
It's simple physics, man.
Yeah.
Oh, and Dan, I heard you were familiar with Flanagan's work, and I'm curious. We're obviously listening to you after decades of research, but and obviously you've had some, unique experiences. I wondered if you wanted to get into how those experiences came about, and had you had access to Flanagan's early neurophone for accelerated learning? Anything you can touch on there?
Pat and I were good friends. We hung out a lot, and we respected each other a great deal, and he really made great progress. Actually, the microhydrin had some of the implosive capacitance of monoatomics, which also had the potential for shortened attention span as well, if not used in the right context. I mean, when he put, like cubic yards of microhydrin into the spa. But actually, Chaz worked with Pat for many years. It's great. But the neurophone, I knew a little about. Actually, I was more involved with Andrew Puharich, which is how the Star Trek series started, when he was using
With the Council of Nine.
Yes, what happened was Puharich was experimenting with the analog to the neurophone, which was his piezo device to trigger the ear bones. He was trying to get deaf people to hear, and he succeeded. Yeah, he's had great success. But what he didn't realize, he had tripped over the physics of clairaudience, which was the piezo conjugation he generated in the bone structure. And the physics of clairaudience was why Enki, at that time called Atum or Tom, started to talk to him. And that's how Star Trek was invented, actually. And I did know him quite well. So it was actually...
Wait, hold on. Just to recap. You're telling me that the early research, and I'm very familiar with Puharich's work, is quintessential, and his connection with Grinberg and Ballet. I mean, it's all so deep, right? Like this is almost the formative years of psychotronic intelligentsia, if you really think about it. And it's phenomenal what you're saying is that they used an early analog. I'm assuming before they slapped the secrecy act on his patent, right, for a decade, which he was rather vehemently pissed off about after the fact. But you're saying that they had an early prototype of that they integrated into metaphysical to essentially enhance their sessions?
His life at that time as a medical doctor was building these devices to let deaf people hear, and he was using what he didn't understand phase conjugation, I don't think.
So bone induction, or
it was a phase conjugate trigger of the inner of the I guess you could say outer ear bones that produced a form of clairaudience. And that's actually what started the telephone for his phone calls to Enki Atum Tom, which is what then he communicated to Phyllis Schlemmer in The Only Planet of Choice, which is how Star Wars was written, actually.
And just pertaining to your own like transcendental experiences, what was it for you that actually got you like kind of on this whole implosion tip? Did you see something in an altered state? And if so, like if you don't mind sharing, like how we're using like say Flower of Life technique, or because that was the first time I heard about you was through John Bell's book, right? And I'm wondering if there were some techniques that you had whittled out of that helped you actually redefine kind of the physics from a higher kind of perceptual viewpoint.
Well, I taught in the psychotronics circuit for more than 20 years with Puharich, and then I taught Flower of Life globally for probably about 20 years too. But actually, my experience core was the Kundalini that began at the Gurdjieff School, Claymont, actually. And I had 30 years of, and more, perhaps, a pretty intense Kundalini physics. And I worked with in Bentov's lab with his capacitive accelerometer, and by understanding the physics of Kundalini, it's quite different than thinking that you're insane, as many people did. It was his plasma density. It's actually inhabiting a lightning bolt. And I think I teach the best course on the physics of Kundalini on the planet, goldenmean.info/Kundalini. You can see the professional documentaries. But it is the phone-on cascade, literally enabling inhabiting a lightning bolt up the spine liquid, which then implodes in the pineal, and the top of my head got pointed, and Valerie can tell you feel the negative ions. rainmaking and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, so that, and I cried for many months continuously after some of those experiences, which obviously was the processing of every unshareable wave.
That's fantastic. I want to take a moment just to check in with you, Dan. How are you feeling for time and for where you're at with your voice? And
well, let's just do a couple more questions, and then maybe maybe I'm
okay, yeah, no, fantastic. We super appreciate your time, and even what you're just saying with Kundalini, I think a lot of people, again, this is where if you haven't merged into the metaphysical dynamics, people hear that word and they think, wait a second, how does physics play into this? And they're articulating it very well. But go ahead.
What Bentoff did, and I was with him when he built the world's most sensitive capacitive accelerometer, he measured the phase lock of the spine liquid pump with the phonon geometry in the brain liquids, which implode at the pineal and propagate into a coherence phenomenon in the ventricle liquid horns, called getting horny, by the way. And so, the psychophysics of Kundalini, stalking the wild pendulum, he was my mentor for years. I worked with him in Switzerland when he set up the lab for Maharishi and the whole bit.
So would this that was the first time that we actually quantifiably measured a sort of brain heart, or what they call cortical coherence?
Yes, Bentoff, he absolutely pioneered that for sure. So he measured the low frequencies of the spine liquid pump locked into phase with the phonon liquids in the brain, the ventricle liquids actually, and that creates a circular rotating implosive loop. For example, he proved that when you feel Kundalini's going up your tailbone like a lightning bolt, actually you can map the phonons traversing around the homunculus of the map of the spine on the brain surface. So is it all in your head or is it both? I mean, it's because he measured the phase lock from the EKG, HRV, the breath, spine liquid pump, and brain liquids. Now, I have since added to that the EEG component, which he didn't measure, but I did. And later we showed that even the missing voice harmonics can be replaced optically with the same physics.
And Grinberg was actually doing the same thing before he disappeared in '96, where they quantifiably showed the coherence in the brain would alter local space-time, which is where he was trying to tie in, and he had his work classified for a period of time. I don't know if you knew that.
I don't know much about him, but it makes total sense. So like when Tiller showed 11 different measurements that focused in human attention causes charge to implode in his book, Conscious Acts of Creation, actually, he didn't have a clue why attention causes charge to implode. I'm the first to answer that question.
You would love Grinberg's work. He was rolling with ballet, Puharich, and
yeah, I knew Bill Tiller quite well, and I knew Bentoff well, and I knew Puharich very well. I knew Vogel very well.
Awesome.
What about John C. Lilly?
Well, hold on, Halsef, I really appreciate the dialogue you guys are having, but we do have several other hands up, and Dan just had a few more questions here, so I'd love to get to Jared and then to Chief, and then Fletcher if we have time for anything.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Aaron. Hey, Dan, what you've been talking a lot has gone well over my head, and it's been impressive, so I'm trying to grasp it. Went to your YouTube, you got 400 channels or videos that I obviously have to now go through. But you mentioned Ormus, which caught my attention because I've been making Ormus for over 10 years and consuming it for 10 years. And I've also taught people, but obviously I don't understand everything that's going on in the universe. And it seems that you do. And if you're mentioning this stuff, I'd like to know more about what it is about Ormus and its effect on the body and stuff.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the physics of why a strong alkaline caustic will precipitate maximum amount of Ormus from the right deep seawater, which has a higher rhodium iridium emulet content. So agricultural Ormes being just an example. So that is literally the physics of alchemy. So that caustic is having a charge collapse function. And that Ormus will be a super dielectric. It'll be a superconductor. Under the right conditions, it will float. And this is the physics of what the ancients did call Holy Communion. And Moses was absolutely trained in making gold powder. That was his primary occupation, and the primary way the Essenes made money around the world, actually, was making the white powder gold and the Holy Communion. And that's originally why what's his name, didn't qualify to be immortal because they wouldn't give him, the Dracos wouldn't give him the white powder gold. You know, your eyes are turning blue and you live forever. Well, the physics is that the seed of implosion in the blood, if it's in the right context, but Thoth himself taught very well that excess consumption of the gold powder without the psychological exercise would result in shortened attention span. And I think that's something Pat Flanagan did not understand.
So, like, when I was doing my studies on Ormus, the guy who was leading the charge there took a pig brain, they dried it, burnt it to ash, then they studied it, and they found it was iridium a minute. And that was fascinating to me because it's a noble metal and it's going to be conductive. And then the idea of you can take salt water, grow algae in the salt water, the plankton eat the algae, the krill eats the plankton, and then the blue whale eats the krill, means you can build an entire blue whale just from salt water with adding carbon and nitrogen into that mix. So as I've been making,
and there was a shaggy algae that Chaz figured out was the physics of how the Essenes made their gold. In fact, that's why they called it showbread. They had to bake it to take the phosphorus out after the algae consumed made more soluble the nano gold.
Right. And so, like, a lot of it was talking about taking the you can make it from the salt water, you can make it from the Dead Sea water salts, and then I switched over to make it from the pink Himalayan salt because the salt water obviously has, you know, it's been contaminated a bit by people. The Dead Sea stuff, when I did make it, it would make a lot of magnesium precipitate with the gold, apparently. But I'm talking like if you used a cup of salt to reconstitute and then make the Ormus, you would end up with like a cup of this precipitate. Now, a lot of that's going to be magnesium, obviously, or at least in theory. Whereas when I started making it out of the pink Himalayan salt, what I found is if I used a cup of salt, I would end up with like less than a tablespoon of precipitate. So in my head, I was like, I'm getting more denser concentrate of these elements. Now, problem is I haven't done a spectral analysis to find out what exactly I extracted here. But like the idea of going back to that pig brain is my fear, like, because you're understanding this on a whole new level. The way I just saw it is I'm like, I'm upgrading the wiring for my body. Woohoo, this is great.
Well,
but it sounds like there's more to it.
Well, you know why mummy powder was sold in every pharmacy in Europe for 300 years? It's because of the Ormus gold powder content, but it's not because the Egyptians were eating the gold powder. No, it's because the implosive capacitance of the natron in mummification was alchemizing. And that's a metaphor for how you immortalize your body in general, actually. It really is the physics of alchemy. Alchemizing the body, chem, just from the place of the blackness, means access to the black hole. Well, obviously, access to the black hole is pure implosion. So alchemizing your body means imploding the aura to the point where it's longitudinally distributing in the array. You know, David Hudson didn't find out he had anything but silicon when he first did the atomic spectrum analysis from the burn. They had to find special people with a different burn rate to even find that it wasn't just silicon. That's alchemy.
So when I'm with this pink salt or whatever, it's going to be more diverse in its elements that I've extracted, or even just going to any of the other extracts from the other salts. Like, what is it actually doing?
It's what's meant by rhodium iridium emulet, which means how do you assemble the perfect stack of implosion at the atomic level? Obviously, the pink salt is not nearly as complete as if you get the right deep seawater. And what did the deep seawater experience? Not only the trace mineral content, but compression.
Very interesting. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Jared. Chief?
So not only have you got the physics of alchemy and fusion down, you've got gravity, which you've helped me understand basically, and I believe I can make like a UFO if I.
Yeah, we could. It'd be crude. You kind of need a government to help. But if I may say, alchemy is only a name for non-destructive implosive isotope transitions. Thanks to Bill Donovan, we have equations for every commercial valuable isotope transition in the atomic table, temperature and frequency, to catalyze every, like aluminum to silver. It's all about understanding the climb down between electron shells. It's literally non-destructive charge collapse. And we got the equations. I mean, alchemy is the physics of the equations of charge collapse for sure.
It's just so unbelievable, but here you are.
So I
thank
would,
you so much.
I think I wanted to follow up maybe with that, that alchemy or something like transmutation, and I did want to ask about Leonard, but maybe we can.
Yes, well, if I may say, so fractalfield.com/isotope transition, you will find a sample of those equations in the metamorphosis PDF, and we need to acknowledge Bill Donovan now, Elizabeth. So that spreadsheet is hundreds of pages, thousands of equations, but we now know the frequency and temperature of isotope transition in general. That's clear. But there was another part of your question. Say again.
Perhaps I'll save it. We have someone who hasn't asked one, and I'll kick it over to them. I don't think I'm interrupting the flow, probably. Fletcher, go on ahead.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, I think my best question was, I live in a caldera. So from what I've heard, it's like high magnetic flux. So like, what's that going to do for me? Like, what's it going to do with my biology? Is it basically just going to be a waveguide, or like, what am I looking at here?
Well, a caldera could be a charge cup, and that could be a container for propagating your aura in lucid dreaming. I would suggest do a bit of basic dowsing, find where the magnetic lines cross, and check the effect on your rituals and lucid dreaming for one thing. But the perfect cup, the Grail cup, that's the introduction to embedding in the fractal. That can be cool. The other thing, like in neighborhoods here, there's high iron content in the soil, which is very energizing for the blood. So the iron content is a major variable. Or if you have high piezo in that area, some basic geobiology, and then find your Hartman-Curry pay-ray lines. We actually know the frequencies of each of those and why the pay-ray line, for example, is most affected by gold. Example, that's how you save a beehive. I mean, geobiology is an advanced. goldenmean.info/geobiology, some intro.
Thank you. That's great.
So if we restored the pyramids, we would get dinosaurs as well?
Now, Dean Asa Uru is the name for the fact that Asa Uru, Uru means Draco, but it actually means portal or gate. Asa means queen of, as in Asa Uru, Jerusalem, the place of the El. So dinosaur was a specific name of a transition engineered by the arrival of the reptilians for a very specific reason. So dinosaurs were Draco food for a certain period. It wasn't exactly the most beautiful thing that ever happened to the planet. But the point is the pyramids are for the restoration of charge implosion, which is the only way to stabilize gravity and atmosphere. And ultimately, when even Lovelock wrote the code for Sim Earth, that when you install Dolman, conscious evolution would explode. Well, he didn't understand the physics of negentropy. He said Gaia was negentropic, and he knew how to increase the negentropy.
So speaking of perhaps increasing the negentropy, my question was about low energy nuclear reactions. I saw that you mentioned
LENR, that's the question I missed. Well, I worked with Joe Cell for years, and then Roger invested so heavily in who's the Italian guy? Rossi, thank you. Which was a disaster. And then we started our own Rossi project. I could make a couple comments. One would be the key absolutely is phonon geometry. I can tell you that for sure. And the other key is capacitive implosion geometry. Absolutely. If you want a hydrogen atom to pop out of water, it's the same physics. You got a frequency signature and you got capacitive implosion, like Kansas glass of cold water burning beautifully. It was simply the right longitudinal through the right longitudinal RF antenna, and the RF frequency, golden ratio times Planck. So all these subjects is specifically charge collapse. That's for sure.
Yeah, certainly. So I guess my question is: you take it as operable. My position is that it's been discovered and utilized and implemented, and some people have it, and it's useful to not share it at the moment. but that something like a sustained catalyzed fusion reaction would be a solution towards energy abundance, etc.
There would be 100 possible symmetry examples, all the way from microwave for nuclear fusion to phonon for hydrogen fusion. It is about fusion reaction. It is about charge collapse, and it's there's tens of thousands of advanced humanoid cultures in this galactic sector alone. We're pretty primitive on this scale.
Are rainbows like slightly transmutative?
Well, thank you. That's one of my favorite questions. We just, we finally figured out why rainbows show up when Tibetan saints die. They add centripetal force called phase conjugation to the environment. And we proved fractalfield.com/fractal photosynthesis. Not only is phase conjugation the reason photosynthesis exists, but if you look a little deeper, it's the only reason color exists. The green flash is instructive. So, the physics of the cause of rainbows when the atmosphere becomes centripetal. There's a famous Sufi book. It's called Mount Analog by René Dumont, the French mathematician. You could only see the spiritual light if you illuminated it by the light of the green flash. Well, then you'd need to study the physics of the green flash. We saw it 3 days in a row in Perth. The atmosphere has to be perfectly fractal and conjugate at the moment of sunset on the perfect horizon. Then you get the green flash.
So that adds a whole new meaning to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Exactly. You
Wow.
got it. You got it. Pot of gold is literally the physics of pure intention, which is literally the shareable wave, which is why the Tibetan saints caused rainbows at death.
That's awesome. I love that. And I'd love to wrap up a space, Dan, with what's meaningful to you right now. I mean, you've been doing this for decades, and you've been articulating so many things so well. And you did mention earlier about the ability of humans on this planet that were directly correlated with the outputs from the sun, the solar dynamics coming up. That's definitely a lot of people's awareness in the space, different solar potential cataclysms or reactions there. Like, where is your heart at with even just this conversation with humanity at large? Like, what are the things that move you the most today?
Well, I'm having a certain amount of fun. Our new firay.com, we turned the power down so it doesn't cause time distortion. And we now know the physics of the Project Looking Glass is in the same kind of plasma. So, we can have a lot of fun with these things. Once you know the physics of lucid dreaming, it ain't far to stargates and wormholes and portals. And, you might actually learn something. So, yeah, we might have a little fun here. But on a practical level, these devices are negentropic. So all kinds of people, we had piezo fire. We had 3 people in a row had removed hernia pain within minutes. This is localized pain is simply the opposite of implosive charge. You restore compression. So these principles are not only, enlightening, but they're commercial. And that's wonderful because as we grow this momentum now, we're going to turn this into the cosmic school. And that is cooking beautifully.
That's wonderful. And Nathaniel, do you have something to add?
Oh no, I mean we could just keep going, but I would like to say thank you for your time and well done and said
yeah,
and
my
everything.
My voice is a bit fried, thank you, but I really enjoyed. And you know what? I agree with what you said earlier. Is that you have an extremely intelligent audience, and I'm impressed. I appreciate meeting all you guys. You are what a group. I congratulate you. Thank you. Blessings.
Oh, thank you very much, Dan. I mean, we hope to, if you enjoyed this the way you did and get a little feel for how spaces work, like I said, we'll work in post. I think we had some technical difficulties along the way on our end too, but we'll try to get something that we can maybe put together for a visual for your YouTube channel like you requested as well, with the slides you went through, and would love to have you for subsequent spaces. I mean, this is kind of the flow and these kind of conversations, and I think it creates, as Nathaniel likes to say, into spaces, a great geometry within the space for novel emergent intuitive properties and conversation to come out.
Thank you. It's been a blessing. Thank you. Nice to meet you. I'll come back anytime. I send blessings.
Wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Oh.